The relentless hail pounded against the rusted metal roof of the abandoned gas station, creating a deafening symphony of neglect on a desolate Indiana highway. It was midnight, and the world seemed to have turned its back on this forgotten corner of the earth, leaving it to be swallowed by the freezing darkness. Puddles of oil mixed with icy slush were forming rapidly on the cracked asphalt, reflecting the jagged bolts of lightning that tore through the sky. In this merciless environment, my tragedy was unfolding that would break even the hardest of hearts, a scene of cruelty so profound that the storm itself seemed to weep in protest. In the center of this freezing hell stood Faith, a beautiful but shattered golden retriever, her coat soaked through to the skin and matted with freezing mud. She was tethered to a rusted light pole by a short, cruel nylon rope that offered her no slack to lie down or seek shelter from the biting wind. Her body trembled violently, not just from the hypothermia setting in, but from a terror that went beyond her own physical pain. Her eyes, red-rimmed and frantic, darted wildly between the empty road and a nondescript cardboard box sitting just out of her reach, sealed tight with heavy industrial tape. Inside that unassuming brown box lay her entire world, 5 newborn puppies, blindly huddling together in a suffocating darkness. They had been shoved inside like garbage, the flaps taped shut with zero regard for their need to breathe. Faith could hear their muffled, high-pitched whimpers growing fainter by the second as the oxygen inside began to deplete. She lunged against the rope, the coarse nylon burning her neck, letting out a strangled cry that wasn't a bark, but a mother's desperate prayer. She was begging the universe for a miracle, knowing that with every passing minute, the tiny heartbeats inside that box were slowing down. Just moments ago, a luxury SUV had idled under the flickering lights, its engine purring with the warmth that Faith and her babies were denied. A woman dressed in an expensive coat had stepped out, her face a mask of indifference as she dumped the box and tied Faith to the pole with efficient, chilling speed. She didn't look back once. She didn't offer a word of comfort. She simply got back into her heated vehicle and sped away, leaving behind a trail of exhaust fumes and a shattered family. The sheer evil of abandoning helpless souls in a deadly storm was a sin that surely marked her soul. Forever, Faith watched the taillights disappear, her heart breaking in her chest as the realization of total abandonment set in. She was a loyal companion who had likely given her best years to this family, only to be discarded like broken furniture when she became inconvenient. The cold began to seize her muscles, turning her limbs stiff, but she refused to give up on the box. She clawed at the wet asphalt, her nails bleeding, trying to chew through the rope, but it was too thick. Her whimpers turned into a low, agonizing moan that cut through the noise of the storm, a sound of pure grief that echoed into the void. But the darkness wasn't as empty as it seemed. From the shadows of the derelict service station, a figure emerged, wrapped in layers of tattered rags. Elias, a 65-year-old man who had lost his home years ago, had been seeking shelter under the awning when he witnessed the heartless crime. He was a man whom society often looked right through, invisible and ignored, but he possessed a wealth of spirit that the woman in the SUV could never buy. Clutching his worn Bible in a pocket close to his heart, he stepped into the freezing rain, his old boots crunching on the hail. Elias approached slowly, his breath visible in the frigid air, his hands trembling not from fear but from the biting cold and the shock of what he was seeing. Most dogs would have snarled or snapped, defending their territory in such a high-stress moment, but Faith sensed something different in this man's aura. She stopped pulling against the rope and looked him dead in the eye, her gaze piercing through the gloom. It was a look of profound recognition, a silent communication between two souls who knew what it felt like to be left behind by the world. If you can feel the pain in Faith's eyes and believe she deserves a miracle tonight, please subscribe to our channel right now. Join our prayer chain for this abandoned mother and her babies. Your positive energy can help turn this tragedy around. Instead of growling, Faith did something that brought tears to Elias's weathered eyes. She gently took the sleeve of his tattered coat in her mouth and pulled. She wasn't pulling him toward her for comfort. She was frantically pulling him toward the taped-up box. Her tail was tucked between her legs, and she let out a sharp, urgent whine, nodding her head toward the cardboard prison. "Please," her body language screamed, "forget about me. Save them." They are dying in there." It was the ultimate act of maternal sacrifice, placing the lives of her children above her own survival. Elias understood immediately, his heart sinking as he realized the horrific purpose of the taped box sitting in the puddle. He dropped to his knees on the icy concrete, ignoring the sharp pain in his arthritic joints, and placed a calloused hand on the wet cardboard. He could feel the faint vibrations of movement inside, weak, frantic struggles for life. "Oh, dear God," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. What kind of monster would do this? The tape was thick, heavy-duty packing tape, and his fingers were numb and clumsy from the freezing temperatures. The situation was critical. The cardboard was beginning to sodden from the rain, but the seal remained airtight, turning the box into a coffin. Elias didn't have a knife. He didn't have scissors. He only had his frozen fingers and sheer determination. He began to pick frantically at the edge of the tape, his fingernails tearing against the strong adhesive. Faith watched him, shivering violently, her nose pressing against his shoulder, urging him to hurry. She knew, perhaps better than he did, that the sounds coming from inside the box were fading into a terrifying silence. The storm raged on, the wind howling like a banshee, threatening to blow their fragile hope away into the night. Every second felt like an hour. Elias's frustration mounted as the tape refused to give way, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip the edge. He looked at Faith, seeing the absolute terror in her eyes, and he knew he couldn't fail her. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a battle against the abstract villain of time and indifference. If he didn't get that box open in the next few moments, this story would end in a tragedy too painful to bear. But they didn't know that the worst was still to come. The cold was sapping the life out of the puppies faster than the lack of air. Elias grit his teeth, finding a reserve of strength born from righteous anger. He brought the box closer to his chest to shield it from the hail, using his own body warmth as a temporary barrier against the elements. Faith let out a singular, heart-wrenching howl that seemed to split the night sky, a final plea to the heavens to guide the hands of this stranger. This is the moment of truth. If you believe that God sends angels in the form of strangers, hit that like button right now. Let's send a wave of blessings to Elias and Faith. May the hands of the wicked be tied, and the hands of the rescuer be strengthened. Driven by an adrenaline rush that defied his age, Elias brought the box up to his face and used his teeth to tear at the stubborn tape. The plastic tasted of chemicals and dirt, but he didn't care. With a savage rip, the seal finally gave way, exposing the interior to the flickering light of the storm. Inside, the 5 puppies were a heartbreaking pile of silent, motionless fur, their tiny chests barely rising. The stale, warm air that escaped the box was quickly replaced by the biting wind, and for a terrifying second, Elias thought he was too late. They looked like discarded toys, too small and fragile to survive such callous brutality. Faith didn't wait for an invitation. She thrust her snout into the box the moment it was open, her rough tongue working frantically over each of her babies. She was performing CPR the only way a mother knew how, licking them vigorously to stimulate their circulation and clear their airways. Her whimpers were soft now, filled with a terrifying question. "Wake up, please wake up." Elias watched, holding his breath, until a tiny, weak squeak emerged from the bottom of the pile. It was the faintest sound of protest, but in that desolate parking lot it sounded like a symphony of hope. They were alive, but fading fast. Now came the logistical nightmare. Elias had opened the box, but he was still miles from help with no vehicle and a freezing storm raging around them. He looked at his shopping cart, parked a few yards away under the awning, his home on wheels filled with recyclables and his meager possessions. He knew what he had to do. Without hesitation, he dumped his collection of cans and plastic bottles onto the ground. A clattering sound echoed in the night, marking the moment Elias chose to sacrifice his livelihood to save these innocent lives. He had nothing, yet he was willing to give up everything. He grabbed his only dry blanket, a moth-eaten wool throw that had kept him alive through 2 winters, and lined the bottom of the rusted metal wire cart. He carefully transferred the puppies one by one, handling them as if they were made of glass. They were cold to the touch, their body temperatures dropping critically. He tucked the flaps of the blanket over them, creating a makeshift cocoon, but the real challenge remained: Faith. The mother dog was still tethered to the pole, shivering so violently that her teeth chattered. Audibly, a sound that cut straight to Elias's heart. Elias approached Faith to untie her, but the knot was frozen solid, stiffened by the ice and water. His fingers, numb and clumsy, struggled to work the nylon loops loose. Faith watched him, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She could have snapped at his fumbling hands out of fear or pain, but instead she leaned her head against his leg, surrendering completely to his control. It was the moment the resistance broke. She wasn't just accepting help, she was putting her life entirely in the hands of this stranger. She understood that he was her only bridge between death and life. After what felt like an eternity of picking at the frozen rope, the knot finally loosened. But as the tension released, Faith's legs buckled. The combination of malnutrition, the freezing cold, and the stress of the ordeal had sapped her remaining strength. She collapsed into the slush, too weak to stand, let alone walk the miles to safety. Elias felt a surge of panic. He was an old man with a bad back. Lifting a 60-pound golden retriever was a physical impossibility on paper, but adrenaline and compassion are powerful fuels. "I'm not leaving you, girl," he grunted, positioning his arms under her belly. With a groan of exertion that strained every muscle in his frail body, Elias hoisted Faith up. He staggered under the weight, his boots slipping on the icy oil patches, but he managed to lay her gently into the cart on top of the blanket, curling, her body around her puppies. She let out a deep sigh as she felt the body heat of her babies, closing her eyes as if to say thank you. Now, Elias was pushing a heavy, rusted cart with a wonky wheel, carrying a precious cargo of 6 souls directly into the teeth of an ice storm. The journey was a grueling test of endurance. The wind whipped against Elias's face, stinging his skin like 1,000 needles. The cart's front wheel kept jamming in the slush, forcing him to shove with all his might to keep moving. Every few minutes he had to stop and check on his passengers. Faith was lethargic, her breathing shallow, her eyes glazing over as hypothermia threatened to shut her organs down. "Stay with me," Elias shouted over the wind, rubbing her ears vigorously. "We are almost there, Faith. Just hold on a little longer." A passing truck roared by, splashing a wave of freezing slush onto the sidewalk, narrowly missing Elias. The driver didn't even tap the brakes. It was a stark reminder of the abstract villain, the indifference of the world. While people sat in heated homes or drove heated cars, a homeless man was fighting a war for life on the sidewalk. But Elias didn't curse the driver. He simply adjusted the plastic tarp he had thrown over the cart to ensure Faith stayed dry. His focus was laser sharp. He wasn't just a homeless man anymore, he was a guardian angel on a mission from God. The physical toll on Elias was mounting. His chest burned with the cold air, and his hands were losing all sensation gripping the metal handle of the cart. He could feel his own energy fading, his knees trembling with every step. But every time he looked down into the cart and saw Faith's golden head resting on her paws, looking up at him with absolute trust, he found a new reserve of strength. She had stopped shivering, which terrified him. It meant her body was no longer trying to warm itself. This was the critical danger zone. Finally, the silhouette of the police station appeared. In the distance, a beacon of authority and safety. But as Elias drew closer, his heart hammered against his ribs. The lights in the lobby were dimmed. It was the graveyard shift in a small town. The main doors might be locked. Panic began to claw at his throat. If he couldn't get them inside within the next few minutes, the warmth of the cart wouldn't be enough. The puppies were silent again, and Faith was barely responding to his voice. The line between rescue and tragedy was razor thin. He pushed the cart up the handicap ramp, his breath coming in ragged gasps, and parked it right against the glass doors. He tried the handle, locked. A wave of despair washed over him, but he refused to let it drown him. He grabbed his wooden cane and began to bang rhythmically on the thick safety glass. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was dull and barely audible over the howling wind. He peered inside, seeing only an empty reception desk and a flickering fluorescent light. "Help!" he screamed, his voice hoarse. "Please! Is anyone there?" Faith lifted her head weakly at the sound of his shouting. She didn't have the energy to bark, but she scraped her paw against the side of the cart, a tiny noise that joined Elias's desperate percussion. It was a partnership of survival. Elias banged harder, terrified that the officer on duty might be in the back, or asleep, or out on patrol. The cold was now seeping into his own bones, making him dizzy. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass, tears freezing on his cheeks. "I won't let you die," he whispered to the dogs, though he was beginning to doubt his own promise. Then he saw movement. A shadow in the back hallway, a figure in a uniform walking casually with a mug in hand. Elias waved his arms frantically, screaming silently through the soundproof glass. The officer stopped, squinted at the door, and saw the disheveled, frantic man and the shopping cart. But instead of rushing, the officer hesitated, perhaps assessing a potential threat. To Elias, that second of hesitation felt like a lifetime. He pointed down at the cart, clasping his hands together in a begging motion, pleading not for money, but for mercy. Faith and her babies are inches away from safety, but the door is still locked. Are you rooting for this angel? Your like helps save more lives. Subscribe to support our mission. Now let's see if they survive. The heavy click of the electronic lock disengaging sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. The glass door swung open, and a wave of heated air rushed out to meet Elias, carrying with it the smell of stale coffee and floor wax. Officer Miller stood in the doorway, his initial suspicion vanishing the moment he saw the contents of the shopping cart. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand ID. He simply grabbed the front of the rusted metal basket and helped Elias heave it over the threshold, dragging the frozen family out of the grip of the storm and into the sanctuary of the station. Lobby. Once inside under the fluorescent lights, the true extent of the damage became horrifyingly clear. Elias pulled back the damp wool blanket with trembling hands, revealing Faith's skeletal frame. Her golden coat was matted with mud and ice, and her gums were a terrifying shade of pale blue. She was barely conscious, her eyes rolling back in her head as the sudden temperature change sent her body into shock. The puppies were motionless lumps of fur, their breathing so shallow it was imperceptible. Officer Miller cursed under his breath, grabbing his radio. "Dispatch, I need emergency veterinary transport at the station. Now, we have a critical situation." The minutes waiting for the transport were agonizing. Elias refused to sit down, hovering over the cart like a guardian spirit, rubbing Faith's paws to generate friction and heat. He whispered broken prayers into her ear, promising her that she hadn't fought this hard just to die in a warm room. Faith let out a low, gurgling sound, fluid in her lungs. The pneumonia was already setting in, a silent killer that moved faster than any predator. The abstract villain had shifted from the cold outside to the failing organs inside their bodies. Every second of delay was a stolen breath. When the animal control van finally screeched to a halt outside, 2 technicians rushed in with a stretcher. They moved with military precision, lifting Faith out of the cart. She panicked for a split second, thrashing weakly as she was separated from her babies, her maternal instinct trying to override her dying body. "It's okay, Mama," Elias choked out, tears streaming down his face into his grey beard. "They are going to help you." He scooped up the puppies, tucking them into a heated carrier provided by the techs. For the first time that night, Elias was allowed to ride in the vehicle, sitting in the back, holding the carrier tight against his chest. The arrival at the 24-hour emergency veterinary clinic was a blur of bright lights and urgent voices. They were rushed through the double doors, bypassing the waiting room. Dr. Sarah, the night shift veterinarian, took one look at Faith and shouted, "Code Blue! Get her on oxygen and start warm IV fluids immediately." The team swarmed around the table, inserting catheters and wrapping Faith in heated blankets. Elias was gently pushed back to the observation window, separated by a pane of glass that felt like a mile-wide chasm. He pressed his palms against it, leaving foggy prints, watching the battle for life unfold. The diagnosis came back quickly, and it was devastating. Dr. Sarah stepped out to speak to Elias, her face grave. "She has severe hypothermia, advanced pneumonia, and signs of heart failure from the stress," she explained, her voice soft but direct. "And the puppies, they are fading. Their blood sugar is critically low. I have to be honest with you, sir. The next hour is going to determine everything. There is a very high chance we could lose the mother, the babies, or all of them." Elias felt his knees give way, sliding down the wall until he hit the floor, burying his face in his hands. Inside the trauma room, the situation took a turn for the worse. The smallest puppy, a tiny female they would later name Hope, stopped breathing. The monitor let out a high-pitched continuous beep that sliced through the room. A technician immediately began performing chest compressions with just 2 fingers on the fragile ribcage. It looked impossible, trying to restart a heart the size of a walnut. Faith, sedated on the other table, seemed to sense the loss of her child. Her heart rate monitor began to spike erratically, an empathetic distress signal that threatened to stop her own heart. Elias watched through the glass, his heart shattering. He saw the technician administering a tiny dose of epinephrine to the puppy. "Come on, little one," he whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of the night. "Don't give up now." It felt like the universe was testing them one last time, demanding a final payment of pain before granting a miracle. The seconds ticked by, 10, 20, 30, with no response from the puppy. The technician looked up at the doctor, shaking her head. It seemed the journey had ended in tragedy for the smallest soul, but then a gasp, a tiny, jerky movement of the puppy's leg. The technician paused, checking the stethoscope. "We have a heartbeat," she exclaimed. The room seemed to exhale. Collectively, the puppy let out a sharp, indignant squeak, filling her lungs with air for the first time in minutes. Almost simultaneously, Faith's monitor stabilized into a steady, rhythmic beep. It was as if the mother had been waiting for her baby to return before she allowed herself to rest. The connection between them was undeniable, a lifeline of love that transcended medical science. The team worked through the night, battling the fever and the infection. They placed the puppies in an incubator that glowed with a warm amber light, looking like a spaceship of safety. Faith was hooked up to warm saline drips and antibiotics, her breathing easing from jagged gasps to deep, restful slumber. Dr. Sarah came out to the waiting room as the sun began to rise, casting a soft morning glow over the exhausted Elias. He had fallen asleep in the plastic chair, clutching his Bible. She gently touched his shoulder, waking him from a nightmare of ice and darkness. "They made it," Dr. Sarah smiled, tears glistening in her own eyes. "All of them. It's a miracle, Elias, a genuine miracle." Elias stared at her, unable to process the words at first. Then a sob broke from his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated relief. The vilain abstrato of death had been defeated not by medicine alone, but by the sheer stubbornness of a mother's love and a stranger's kindness. The crisis had passed, leaving behind a stillness that felt like a blessing. Dr. Sarah led Elias back into the recovery room. The sight that greeted him was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Faith was awake, her head raised slightly, her eyes clear and focused. The puppies had been moved to a soft bed right next to her nose so she could smell them. When she saw Elias, she didn't just wag her tail. She let out a soft woof of recognition. It wasn't a beg for help this time. It was a greeting, a thank you. Elias approached the cage, and Faith licked his hand through the bars, her tongue warm and rough. The ice was gone. However, the reality of the situation lingered. Faith was safe, but she was a shadow of the dog she was meant to be. Her ribs were visible, her coat was ruined, and she had a long road of physical therapy ahead. Elias, too, looked broken, a hero in rags, smelling of the street, with nowhere to go once he left the clinic. But for this moment, in the quiet hum of the veterinary hospital, they were kings and queens. They had cheated death. The bond forged in the storm was now cemented in the warmth of survival. They survived the night against all odds, but look at them, they are safe but still so fragile. If you believe Faith and her babies deserve a life full of love after this nightmare, type Amen in the comments to bless their recovery. Your energy matters. Fast forward 60 days and the scene that unfolds is so bright and joyful, it almost hurts the eyes to look at it, a stark contrast to the grey nightmare of that gas station. The sun is shining down on a sprawling green lawn, and bounding across the grass is a creature that seems made of pure light. Faith is no longer the skeletal, matted ghost we met in the storm. She has transformed into a magnificent golden retriever, her coat thick, lustrous, and shimmering like spun gold. She carries her head high, her tail waving like a banner of victory. It is the ultimate glow-up, a physical manifestation of what love can do to a broken soul. The journey to this moment began with the legendary spa day, a turning point that washed away the last remnants of her trauma. Volunteers at the shelter had prepared a warm bath filled with soothing oatmeal shampoo and rose-scented bubbles. As the warm water rinsed away the dirt of the highway, it seemed to take the pain with it. Faith, who had once flinched at the touch of a hand, now leaned into the scrubbing, closing her eyes in pure bliss. The blow-dryer revealed the fluffiest, softest fur imaginable. She wasn't just clean, she was reclaiming her dignity, emerging from the tub not as a victim but as the queen she was born to be. And then there were the puppies, 5 chaotic, chubby balls of energy that had taken over the shelter's play yard. They were no longer silent lumps in a box. They were a hurricane of joy. Hope, the little female who had flatlined on the table, was now the ringleader, tackling her brothers and barking with a ferocity that made everyone laugh. They were growing at an incredible rate, fueled by high-quality food and constant cuddles. Watching Faith lie in the grass while her babies climbed all over her, gently nudging them with her wet nose, was a scene of domestic perfection that healed every heart that witnessed it. But the transformation wasn't just physical. Faith's personality had bloomed like a flower in spring. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a sparkling mischief. She discovered the joy of tennis balls, chasing them with the enthusiasm of a puppy herself. She greeted every human visitor with a smile, her mouth open and tongue lolling, demanding belly rubs with a paw swat that was impossible to resist. She had learned that hands were for petting, not hurting, and that the sound of footsteps meant treats, not abandonment. She had forgiven the human race, a testament to the boundless capacity of a dog's heart. Meanwhile, the wheels of justice had been turning in the background, fueled by the viral outrage of the community. The security footage from the gas station had been recovered, and the license plate of the luxury SUV was clear as day. The police tracked down the woman who had abandoned them. She faced maximum charges for animal cruelty and abandonment, receiving a hefty fine and a lifetime ban from owning animals. Her name was released to the public, and the social shame she faced was a swift dose of karma. The abstract villain had been defeated by the concrete force of the law, satisfying the public's deep need for righteousness. However, the most beautiful part of this ending wasn't just about the dogs, it was about Elias. The story of the homeless hero who gave his only blanket to save a dog had touched millions. A crowdfunding campaign set up by the police department exploded, raising enough money not just to buy Elias a warm meal, but to change his life completely. He didn't just get a check, he got a purpose. The shelter, recognizing his magical bond with animals, offered him a full-time job and a small, cozy cottage on the sanctuary grounds. Elias was no longer invisible. He was the guardian of the gate, a man respected and loved by his community. The final scene finds us on the porch of Elias's new cottage, bathed in the golden hour of the setting sun. Elias sits in a rocking chair, a hot cup of coffee in his hands that are no longer frozen or shaking. He looks out over the sanctuary grounds with a peace that surpasses understanding. He is clean-shaven, wearing fresh clothes, but his eyes still hold the depth of a man who has seen the bottom and climbed his way back up. He isn't rich in money, but looking at what lies at his feet, he is the wealthiest man in the world. Faith is sleeping soundly on a rug beside his chair, her head resting heavily on his boot. She refuses to sleep anywhere else. Even though she is healthy and independent, she knows who her savior is. Every now and then, she opens one eye to check if he is still there, and Elias reaches down to scratch behind her ears. "I'm right here, girl," he whispers, just like he did that night in the storm. "We made it." The puppies, now adopted into loving families of their own, visit on weekends, creating a chaotic family reunion that fills the cottage with life. This is more than just a rescue story. It is a story of mutual salvation. Faith saved Elias from loneliness and invisibility just as much as he saved her from the cold. They found each other in the darkest hour, two castaways in a storm of indifference, and together they built a lighthouse. As the screen fades to black, we are left with the image of the man and his dog, silhouetted against the sunset, a living monument to the power of compassion. The storm is over, the sun has risen, and love, as it always should, has won. Faith and Elias have found their paradise, and justice was served to the woman who hurt them. Now, a question for you. Do you think the woman's punishment was enough, or does she deserve jail time? Tell us your honest opinion in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like to show that every animal deserves a hero. And don't forget to type Amen to bless Elias and Faith's new life together. Subscribe for more miracle rescues.